Saints. I'd like to give another installment on my teaching on the book of Joel. This is part 6, and I'll call it Turning Back the Northern Army. And we'll be reading from Joel chapter 2, verse 18 to 21. Then will the Lord be jealous for his land and pity his people. Yea, the Lord will answer and say unto his people, Behold, I'll send you corn and wine and oil, and you will be satisfied therewith. And I will no more make you a reproach among the heathen, but I will remove far off from you the northern army, and I will drive him into a land barren and desolate, with his face toward the east sea, and his hinder part toward the utmost sea. And his stink shall come up, and his ill savor shall come up, because he hath done great things. Fear not, O land, be glad and rejoice, for the Lord will do great things. Joel 2. 18 to 21. Now Joel saw a locust invasion, a real one, which left the land devastated, stripping away everything living in a series of destructive waves. But he also saw in it the day of the Lord. His prophecy would be fulfilled in the Babylonian invasion. In 4 successive waves between 586 to 539 BC, the Babylonians stripped away the royal family of Judah, the skilled artisans, the craftsmen, the military leaders, and then they came and stripped away the local leaders, and eventually they burned down the temple, plundering it, killing many of the priests, and gutting the external trappings of the only true religion on earth at that time. Among the treasures they took out of it was Daniel and Ezekiel. But prophecies of the future are like mountaintops. You think you're seeing one, but really you're seeing many. There would be many more locust invasions. The Seleucids would come, as would the Romans, the Mongols, the Arabs, the Ottoman Turks, the Russians, the Poles, the Germans, and lately the Western powers as well. All would come in their waves, stripping the people of Judah of their children, their lands, their religion, their culture. In short, they would take everything. This would continue to the very end. This is the message of the removal of the northern army that Joel spoke of. Joel, by the Spirit of the Lord, is referring to Israel's final conflict and deliverance, the coming war of Gog and Magog, also to be prophesied by Ezekiel in chapter 38. Now we know that this is the same because Ezekiel mentions the burial and stench of the dead of that army after God himself destroys them, and that God will let their bodies be a feast to the birds of carrion. Can you imagine the stench? And will it ordain that their bodies be burned eventually on the east of the sea, which is downwind. The bodies will be exposed for 7 months. On the mountains of Israel, Ezekiel says, you will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you. I'll give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in the open field, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. On that day I'll give Gog a burial place in Israel, in the valley of those who travel east of the sea. It will block the way of travelers, because Gog and all his hordes will be buried there. So it will be called the valley of Haman Gog, Ezekiel 38, 4 through 5 and 11. Ezekiel 39. Thus Joel and Ezekiel are talking about the same thing. This stripping, gnawing, swarming, and devouring of Israel and Judah would continue on down to the very end. It's a miracle, really, that God has kept Israel in existence. Joel's message tells us that it really doesn't have to be so, but that it will be so. Israel could repent. God is so much inclined to forgive, to relent, to give a blessing, and to restore. And in fact, one day he will be able to do so in a way which is consistent with his own holiness. The Lord loves his people, backslidden though they are. He wants to restore. He would give a blessing again, as in olden times. And I quote, Behold, I'll send you corn and wine and oil, and you will be satisfied therewith, and I will no more make you a reproach among the heathen. The Lord alone can remove the shame and reproach of his people, but they must turn to him. They must repent before him, and in lowly supplication they must seek him with all of their hearts. Once again, I quote, "Be not afraid, ye beasts of the field, for the pastures of the wilderness do spring. For the tree bears her fruit, the fig tree and the vine do yield their strength. Be glad then, ye children of Zion, rejoice in the Lord your God, for he hath given you the former rain moderately, and he'll cause to come down for you the rain, the former rain and the latter rain in the first month. And the floors shall be full of wheat, and the vats shall overflow with wine and oil. And I will restore to you the years that the locust hath eaten, the cankerworm and the caterpillar and the palmer worm, my great army which I sent among you." Joel 2:22-25. Until that restoration, for Israel, all is barren, dead, and fruitless. In the Holy Land there are 2 seasons of rain, the one for the planting and the final rain for the harvest. Each is essential in its turn. The early rain and the latter rain are what they're called. God made the Holy Land to be morally sensitive. If the people sinned, committed spiritual adultery, and became unfaithful, eventually the rain would be withheld, the crops would fail, and people would die. God is telling the beasts of the field not to fear, for the grazing lands would be watered again. The trees would bear their fruit, notably the fig tree, Israel, and the vine, the church. His barren, dead, and fruitless world would soon come back to life on the day when God pours out the latter rain upon his holy people. On that day, the harvest of grains, which is souls, would cover the floors, and the vats would overflow with new wine, spiritual life. And God will restore to the people what the successive waves of locusts had stripped, gnawed, licked, and swarmed away from before them. This for the world, according to the Apostle Paul. He said, if the casting away of Israel is mercy for us Gentiles, what will their restoration be? Nothing less than the resurrection of life, not just for Israel, but for the whole world. Shalom, everybody. It's sure to come.